Our first technique is called slip trailing. So I trace this picture onto leather hard clay, and now I'm going to trace those impressions with some slip in a squeeze bottle. And it takes a little practice. You see my first squeeze there, left a little gob, a little too much. But otherwise, once you get the feel of things, it usually goes okay, except right there, where an air bubble made a little spatter, and that's not ideal. But a little bit of practice, you should be all right. After, we're going to glaze over this so that the raised up slip leaves a texture. The next technique is called an underglaze transfer. So I've already painted on a couple coats of blue underglaze, and this piece works just like a temporary tattoo. So I lay it down, get it a little damp with a damp sponge, and then work it over to make sure there's no wrinkles and smooth things out so there's plenty of cohesion between the underglaze transfer and the underglaze surface. You kind of got to pay attention. You don't want to get it sopping wet because things then smear, and you want to smooth it out nice and even. And you wait a little bit and then peel it off, and it should be fine. Something that's important too is we have large sheets of these underglaze transfers, so you want to cut your sheet to be just slightly bigger than your box. Or you could use multiple scraps and have a little collage if that's something you're into. Our next technique is called mishima. So I've already put down a couple layers of green underglaze, and those have all firmed up. And so now I'm adding wax, a couple layers of wax to protect the entire side. Once that wax dries up, I'm using the same image of the flower again, and I'm using the stylus tool to trace that image into the leather hard clay, so I'll leave those indents kind of like I did before. You could use a dull pencil for this as well. You just don't want to use anything too sharp so that you shred up the paper or really gouge out the clay. And once that is done, I'm going to use a relatively sharp tool to now carve away all the lines that I made. And you want to be careful about this. You want to make sure it's done at the leather hard stage, not at a bone dry stage, because then it will chip away. You want to have nice clean lines. You want to have them wide, not terribly deep, but you need them to be wide so that the technique works out. Now, after I've carefully cleaned out all of my crumbs out of my carving, I'm going to use a small brush and I'm going to fill in all my carvings with underglaze. And I can do this 2 to 3 times to make sure that I have plenty of thickness of the underglaze in my carvings. The whole point here is to have a nice clean outline against the green background. More time, more patience to let things dry so that the technique is properly done and not rushed. Once I'm all done filling in my lines and my underglaze is reasonably dry, then I go back with a damp sponge and wipe away the excess that's resting on the wax, which should be still fairly damp and easy to wipe away. But you need to clean your sponge a few times. Make sure that you are really getting rid of any of the smears across the wax, because the whole point is that the green should be clean and the lines should also be nice and crisp. And obviously you can create any background you want, you don't have to do green. Our last technique is about paper masking. So I've already put down some red, and then I tore a piece of paper here, and now I'm sponging orange underglaze around the borders there. And so I'm just going to keep layering. I have lots of torn pieces of paper that I'm going to lay down on top of other colors. And I'm thinking a little bit about this. This is more of it looks a little mountainish, but as I keep going, I'm just sort of adding into space and adding colors. So there's lots of layering and lots of colors and lots of interesting things to look at, as opposed to things being too simple and too bland. And this is another technique that requires a lot of patience, because you have to wait. You have to wait for things to dry. If you keep sponging on top of things that aren't dry, then you're just going to end up with a lot of muddy colors, and that's not really ideal. Also, if your layers are not thick enough, then the colors underneath show through, and that also becomes kind of muddy. And you could do this with any kinds of shapes. You could make very specific shapes, use a scissors or X-Acto knife. You could create any kind of stencils you want, or if you had them already, if you had stickers that were shaped like something, you could use stickers. It's really, really open and avails you to a lot of creativity. The one thing you don't want to do is just be minimal, because minimal is boring right now. And all of these techniques will have either a glaze over them, or will have a layer of clear glaze over it to protect everything.